Trade and immigration and agriculture caught in the middle. Plus, beefing up school lunch. We'll tell you how many schools now have local beef on the menu. And Cattlemens Classic is underway. We'll have a preview. Plus, head to Southern Valley to meet our Farm Youth of the Month. Get ready to grow. Cattlemen's Classic, beef in schools. Those stories in just a moment. But first, a local cattle producer with a national platform speaks out on trade. Craig Uden, the president of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and of Dar Feedlot in central Nebraska, urges the president to move forward with free and fair trade deals. He contributed to a joint letter to President Trump. He said, quote, "A successful, comprehensive agreement with Japan would result in one of the greatest free trade agreements for the U.S. pork and beef industries and for many other sectors," end quote. And we want to hear from you. Our poll question of the week: what do you think of President Trump's policies on trade? Good or bad for agriculture? Follow NTV's Grow on Twitter to cast your vote. Staying with issues of trade, one Mexican leader wants his country to stop buying U.S. corn. The Mexican senator leads a committee on foreign relations and says he will introduce a bill to buy corn from Brazil and Argentina instead of the U.S. That could hurt American farmers. Mexico bought $2.4 billion worth of corn from the U.S. in 2015. The grain is a staple in many Mexican foods, and the U.S. is the world's largest corn exporter. Threats of a corn boycott are in response to President Donald Trump's tough stances on the border with Mexico and NAFTA. U.S. corn exports to Mexico have increased more than 600% since the deal was enacted in 1994. Many immigrants from that country marched across this country this week. That includes Grand Island. Many of those marching in GI say they were attracted by jobs in agriculture, specifically the JBS packing plant, but also welding and other careers at local manufacturing plants that make agricultural equipment. It was part of a national effort called A Day Without Immigrants. The nation's cattlemen support immigration reform. NCBA has had a policy for several years that supports hiring legal, documented immigrants, but they also want a non-seasonal temporary worker program to ensure an adequate workforce. And they want opportunities for current employees in the U.S. illegally to apply for legal status. And big news potentially for Nebraska's egg industry, as the Senate has confirmed Scott Pruitt to head the Environmental Protection Agency. The largely party line vote was 52 to 46. Democratic Senators Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota and Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who both represent energy-producing states, voted for Pruitt. And Nebraska Farm Bureau President Steve Nelson reacted to Friday's approval, saying, quote, "From the obviously harmful waters of the U.S. and greenhouse gas regulations to the lesser-known changes made to oil spill and irrigation motor regulations, it is our hope that Mr. Pruitt will not only repeal many of these economically harmful regulations, but also work to ensure the EPA's culture of regulatory expansion is permanently changed," end quote. Cattlemen across Nebraska are beefing up school lunch. Thayer Central in Hebron was one of the first bringing local beef to the cafeteria. Now 4 dozen schools have similar programs. Groups like the Beef Council and Cattlemen support the effort, saying it connects cattle producers to kids and connects kids to agriculture.
A great story about community support and how grassroots efforts among school administrators, local cattlemen have come together to provide students with local beef that's raised and to connect them with agriculture so that they can learn about how that beef is produced and also experience that in the lunchroom in the cafeteria in some great beef recipes.
Thayer Central hosted a Beef in Schools Summit this past week, attracting around 130 people from dozens of schools as they look at how to best implement this program. Vendors and cattle producers gear up for this year's Nebraska Cattlemen's Classic. NTV's Valerie Juarez was out before the event for a preview.
Crews have been working hard all day to set up in time for tomorrow's big event. The annual show that features horses and cattle will be attracting many non-locals in the ag industry.
We've got ranchers coming in from all the way on the other side of Denver, Colorado, and of course the sandhills of Nebraska.
This year's Cattlemen's Classic will also be featuring new events different to past years.
We have our first annual draft horse feed team races that will kick off our Saturday evening activities at 7:30.
The impact this annual event has on the community of Kearney is tremendous. The Chamber of Commerce says it's worth about $1 million.
Genetic potential from cow-calf to the feedlot and beyond. Genetics an important thing in the beef industry, something the Angus Association talked more about at meetings held this past fall in Grand Island.
Changing beef markets call for even more genetic focus.
As we go forward, especially in times of tight margins and the risk that we have in the marketplace, anything that can be done genetically to narrow that down and to focus on some of the premiums that are possible that way, I think gives the cow-calf producer especially a great advantage, perhaps as much as anyone in the industry, to take advantage and to be rewarded for the effort that they can put into improving genetics that way.
The cattle feeder gives credit to cow-calf producers for the improvement in quality over the years.
Genetics is a huge factor, and we know that there's great variation even within breeds in terms of genetic potential of the cattle. And even this spring we had 2 loads of cattle that graded 40% prime. And so, you know, that speaks, those were both from producers that have put an emphasis on quality. And it's just interesting and encouraging to see what progress can be made as people focus on those things, and then to not lose track of the cutability and growth factors that are important as well too.
The crew at this Marquette, Kansas feed yard works to manage the animals in a way that makes the most of their genetics.
That's one thing, a smaller operation of our size, we can focus more, I think, on individual sorting and attention to customers and knowing a history with them too of what their cattle are capable of. And so we do actively sort cattle to try to maximize their potential and harvest them before they've been around too long.
But he's still working every day to optimize that potential.
The biggest adjustment we can make, I think, from a management standpoint is being aware of the potential of the cattle, and then using our sorting and then evaluating which particular grid might be best to use to market the cattle in to get the best premium we can for our customer that way.
That kind of teamwork works in every market. I'm Bob Cervera.
The number of farms in Nebraska on the decline. According to the USDA, the state had 300 fewer farms in 2016 than it did the year before. The total number of farms now stands at 48,400. Farms with less than $100,000 in sales dropped by 900, while the larger ones increased by 600. The average size of a farm grew to 934 acres. And a similar story in Kansas, with 600 fewer farms than the previous year. The farms lost were all very small, with less than $100,000 in annual sales. The number of medium to large farms remains unchanged in Kansas. The state also saw a decline of 100,000 acres no longer used for farming and ranching. Speaking of land, tax relief still on the governor's agenda. This week, the governor visited Broken Bow, and he also signed budget cuts for the current fiscal year. But Ricketts says to balance the budget, it's going to take more than action in Lincoln. Spending needs to be examined at the local level as well.
People to go to their local school board, county board, city, NRD, whatever, to be able to weigh in on the budget, especially at budget time, to ask questions about how they're prioritizing their spending and how they're controlling those taxes, because at the end of the day, the state doesn't collect property taxes. It's all your local entities that do that.
The legislature has been bogged down, but no action on tax cuts at this point. Now the results of last week's poll question. We asked about property taxes in Nebraska. The governor's plan would factor the income potential of the land, while Farm Bureau and others propose an expansion of the sales tax, with that money going to schools to offset property taxes. And as you see, those came in neck and neck. Just 4% said property taxes in Nebraska are fine. Spring planting approaches in Nebraska, but what can we expect? USDA will survey approximately 84,000 farmers in March to determine their plans for the upcoming growing season. The Prospective Plantings Report provides the first survey-based estimates for the year. USDA leaders say it's one of the most important surveys they conduct. Questionnaires are coming out in the mail soon. The results will be aggregated so no individual operation or farmer can be identified. Up next, energy is money and some could be wasted with irrigation pumping. We'll have more. And now Alyssa Willard has a preview of a story still to come.
A greenhouse might not be where you'd expect a high school classroom, but it's exactly where you'll find this week's Farm Youth of the Month. We'll have that coming up.